Hey, me again. It's been about 4 days since I put out my last video, and I've gotten pretty well nothing done since. Spent a good amount of time yesterday on some physics issues that have no real impact on the gameplay. And so since I was banging my head against the wall with that and got nowhere with it, I've decided to switch off of that because there's no real reason for me to be working on it right now. Instead of spinning my wheels on useless bullshit, I should be working on only the things that need to be done to get this game in a playable state. And little physics things for destruction physics or whatever isn't that. So I've reset my repo back to where I was, and I'm gonna get to work on important stuff today. Speaking of important things, here's the to-do list here. Now there's quite a few items that definitely need to be done here, but I feel like I'm lacking an overall vision for what the minimal viable kind of product is that I need, or what the features I need for that are. I know that there exists these issues, but first I'm gonna take a step back and figure out, yeah, what my end goal here is. Okay, here I have a server. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Here I have a server and 2 clients open locally. This is the UI that's presented to a player right now. So far, the client UI is extremely minimal. It's like only what I need to do to actually try getting a game connected, and so we can do that now. But if I'm using the online service, if the servers are hosted in the cloud, I would be able to hit these buttons and list active game sessions, and if there are none, then I can create one and then join the first one on the list. So beyond the technical shortcomings of the current UX, which is literally just a minimal debug layer kind of thing, I kind of want to think about what I want this UX to actually be like what do I intend it to be like in the final product. It is not my intent to have a server browser and where you know, join matches like this. The intent that I do have is that you would join a VR room, and you would walk up to a table, and somebody else would walk up to that table, and you would both start a match, kind of just like if you started playing a game of chess in real life. So part of me is saying, yes, let's go ahead and build the social rooms. Let's get the VR working the way it's supposed to, and let's build this VR UI, and let's make these social rooms happen, because that's a big part of what the game is about to me. The other part of me is saying, let's just validate the tabletop gameplay right now. We don't need VR for that. We don't need much. We can literally just have a server browser like we have and make it work a little bit better, so that we can just test to see if the tabletop gameplay is fun. So I guess I need to decide for myself whether it's more important to validate the tabletop gameplay quickly right now, or if it's more important to work towards the end user experience, which includes the social features. I'm gonna have to take a minute to think about this because I'm really not sure. Right, skipped ahead into the future. This is me from many hours later, during the same day, maybe 4 or 5 hours later. I had a hard time figuring this out, but I have a plan now, so here it is. So, step number 1 is to make a Match Browser 2.0. So we're gonna improve on it and make it fully functional and get a fully working user experience out of it that people can use, even if it's not pretty. Step 2 is to get get the VR experience working again, the way it should be. So far on the channel, I've been describing a VR game, but I haven't shown you a VR game, and I really need to get that back up and running. As I mentioned a couple episodes ago, the reason why I'm not showing you VR right now is that it's kind of broken, and I moved to a new rendering pipeline in Unity that is missing some features that I need. So if Unity hasn't delivered the features that I need to get VR working in the lightweight render pipeline, I'm going to switch back to the built-in render pipeline and just go ahead with that because I need to make progress. Now, once I've done that, the next thing would be to take the UI that I've made for the Match Browser and implement that so that it works in VR as well. Ideally, I'll probably make one UI system that works between the 2 modes. Now, point of clarity here, I'm not sure that I intend to ship this game with a non-VR mode. Like, I'm not sure I'm gonna ship it on Steam for keyboard and mouse players or gamepad players. There's a chance of that, but the reason why I'm supporting non-VR mode for now is mainly development. It's really useful to test things without having to put on the headset every time that I want to hit play, and it also opens the game up for testing to a lot more users. I know some of you in the comments have expressed interest in partaking in some early alpha testing or pre-alpha testing, but I don't even know if they have VR headsets, so it's probably best. That's one more perk of having a non-VR mode. And then at the end of the day, if I decide that this game is worthwhile on a non-VR platform, then I have the option to ship it on there. Now the next thing after that, after fixing up a few other smaller items that I have listed here, would be social room functionality. Now this starts to get into some of the social features that I think are super important to the game. More important than the tabletop, the twin stick shooting. Well, I wouldn't say more important than that, because that's, I mean, obviously the twin stick shooting is the core of it, and it's everything is built around that. But the reason why this game exists is, at the end of the day, probably for the social features and not for the twin stick shooting, hence why it's a VR game in the first place. So back to step number one. I've actually done a good deal of thinking and fleshing out of this user experience that I need. The minimal viable user experience that I need so that players can hop into the games and play against each other. What we're gonna try to do is have a server browser, much like what I showed you. I think I showed you that. I may have cut it out, I don't remember. But let's just go through this life cycle of a match step by step. So previously I didn't really have the life cycle of a match really well defined. So you would start a match or start a game server, and then two people would join the same game, and then the simulation would start, and then it didn't really have an end until you close the server or disconnect both players. So let's look at version 2 of that workflow. So the first step in this life cycle is the user listing a match. So creating a match so that somebody else can join and they can start playing. Now, key distinction or key feature that I want to implement here is for this to be just a listing and not an actual game server until both players have joined and they're actually going to start playing. Because right now, when you go to create a game session, as it's called, that actually spawns or reserves a game server instance. So I don't want to do that. I just want to say here's a listing, and then once two users have kind of accepted or joined that listing, then it will spawn a game server and they'll both join it. Next, I need to implement a simple little UI so that both players can ready up before the simulation actually starts, before the match begins. Once both players press the button or whatever it is, the on-screen button or A button or something, the match will count down. I'll need to put that in as well. Some UI to count down the match, like 3, 2, 1, and the match begins. Now, the next thing to put in that's not currently there is to end the match if a player is killed. So it's going to be 1 life versus 1 life, and if you get killed, then the match is over. Or if the player disconnects, the match also needs to end, which currently, if you disconnect one player, the match just keeps going. So if a match is ended by a player winning or killing the other player, then I'm just gonna pop the ready prompt back up so that they can restart the match if they'd like to replay against each other. But if a player disconnects or goes back to the menu, then it'll shut down the game server and boot anybody who's remaining back into the menu as well. That might all sound pretty straightforward and simple, and design-wise it really is. It's the least complex thing I can possibly do. But there's actually quite a lot of work in there and quite a few features that I have not implemented yet. For example, the listings concept, instead of just starting a game server, I'm not sure how those listings are gonna work. I'm thinking I might actually need to make a web and always running backend server just to manage these matches. So it'll actually be my first like non-Unity project that I put up live. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, there's actually quite a bit of work here, and I might as well get started on it. So I will see you on the other side of the time lapse.